Wyoming, 1892. A miner's widow steps off a blizzard train with one letter and no welcome. A fevered night, a beam that snaps, wolves pacing the fence, and a small voice asks, can she be family? Stay for the lantern-lit proposal, the bunkhouse school, and a love that keeps fire without forgetting snow. Snow came down in sheets, fine as flour and mean as ground glass. The train hissed and settled at Coal Creek was ocean, iron wheels squealing against ice. Nora Hale stepped to the platform with a scuffed wood valise and a small leather pouch pressed to her ribs. Wind took her breath, bit her ears, slid under her thin wool like a thief. "Miner's widow," somebody said behind a mitten, another voice, older and flat. "Wyoming don't run on pity, runs on grit." Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. She kept her chin level. The pouch held a letter creased to softness, the ink gone pale at the folds. "Mrs. Hale, I require a cook at my ranch. Conditions plain, pay fair, come if you can manage." Cole Turner. No comfort in it, but it was a door not yet shut. A mule sled rattled up, bells dull with frost. The driver tipped his hat with 2 fingers. "Name's Pike. Bar T." He tossed her valise like it weighed nothing and nodded to the seat. They slid out of the station yard, runners squealing, crows lifting from the coal piles like scraps of night. The land opened, white to the far rim, black pines like fence posts hammered into the horizon. Pitch stung the nose. Snow packed in the seams of her boots and squeaked when she flexed her toes. Pike clucked at the mules and talked the way men do who've seen more winters than they've counted. "Storm laid an ice crust on the pasture. Cattle don't like that. Eats their tongues. Hay's dear, too." He didn't ask who she was beyond what the station had already given him, Mahit. Folks here let the wind carry a story. No one runs after it. They topped a swell, and the ranch house stood out, big-shouldered under a load of snow. Logs chinked tight, roof pitched high, porch boards iced over to a dull glass. Bunkhouse low to the left, corrals running off into gray. A windmill ticked slow, each click a cold nail. Pike pulled up. "That's your stove and your keep," he said, meaning the house. "He's straight, cold in talk, but straight." He hauled her valise to the porch and left her there with a nod, the mules already shouldering into the wind. The door opened before she knocked. A tall man filled the frame, coat buttoned to the throat, hat in his hand, but not for welcome. Eyes, the color of storm ice, studied her, slid to the valise, then to the pouch she kept tight to her chest. "Nora Hale," she said, voice small from the cold. "Cole Turner," he answered. "You're on time." Steam from the warm inside drifted around him and died in the doorway. She smelled coffee gone bitter and old smoke. Somewhere in the house a hinge squeaked and went quiet again. "I hired a cook," he said, "not a guest." "Yes, sir." Her fingers had gone stiff around the pouch. She made herself put it away. He stepped back enough to let her pass. Boots rang on the threshold, then thudded on plank floor. The kitchen lay to the right, iron stove listing a little, flue door wired shut with baling wire, cast iron hung dull with soot. A sack of flour slouched open on the counter, and a crusted spoon lay where the last cook had left off trying. "Conditions are plain," he said again, as if the letter needed speaking out loud. "Up at 4. Bread every day, beans, salt pork, whatever fresh the men bring in when weather lets 'em. You'll keep the coffee hot and the water bucket clean. That's the work I can manage," she said. The room said otherwise, but rooms have lied before. He nodded once. "Bedding's in the pantry corner. You'll eat after the hands. Pike'll show you the pump. If you've got trouble with the flu, Whit Rollins will knock it clear when he comes off the south fence." She set the valise at the end of the table and unwrapped her shawl. Her hands shook, whether from cold or from gate-edge nerves, she couldn't tell. He watched long enough to measure, not long enough to soften. "Anything else?" she asked. He put his hat back on. "Do the job. We're short on hay and long on winter." When he left, the door thumped once and the house took on its old shape around her. She lifted the stove lid, the hinge screamed. Soot puffed like a crow. She found kindling, split small, laid it neat, struck a match with her thumb. Flame caught, ran along the slivers, licked the log. Heat came slow and mean. From her pouch, she took the letter one more time, not to read it. She knew every word, but to feel the weight of it, the way you feel a coin in the dark, to prove it's there. She slid it away, rolled her sleeves, and set a bowl for starter. Outside, Juani's wind ripped along the eaves, making a clean sound like a knife drawn from a sheath. "Work first," she said into the empty room, "then breathe." The flue coughed soot when she tapped it with a spoon. Black came down like dry rain, peppering the counter, ghosting her cuffs. Nora tied a rag over her mouth, set a coal shovel at the ready, and fed the fire little by little till the stove plates turned from iron dark to a faint, useful red. Heat crept out across the floorboards. Stingy but alive, she took stock. A sack of flour half gone and damp at one corner. Beans enough for a week. Salt pork striped with yellow fat and a rind like rawhide. 2 onions sprouted pale curls, a twist of coffee in the bottom of a tin, lard with a sour edge. She scraped the mold off the cheese heel, sniffed it, shrugged. "We'll make do?" Starter went into a crock, flour, warm water from the pump, a pinch of sugar. She turned to coffee while the sponge woke, ground the last of the beans with a rolling pin, rolled them under the heel of her hand till the tin smelled like bitter mornings. Water hissed. The first boil came too fast, climbed the pot, spit black across the hob. She cursed soft, lifted it clear, blew on the foam, set it back to a stubborn simmer. She stirred dough when the sponge bubbled. Sourdough takes a steady stove and time. She had a bulky stove and a house full of hungry hands due at noon. She shaped loaves quick, scored them with her smallest knife, shoved the first one in, and swung the door shut. The hinge squealed like a thing in pain. Smoke slunk out around the door seam. She spun the damper, waited, spun it back. The room filled with a low, scorched smell, not high flames, worse, the slow ruin of a bottom burn. She yanked the loaf, turned it out, found a black crust as mean as tar. The inside was raw and gummy, heat having chosen its battle and lost the rest. She set the loaf on the table, both hands flat, breathing like she'd climbed a hill. A step sounded at the jamb. Cole Turner stood there in his coat, hat brim wet with melt. He gave the room a slow once-over. The soot, the damp flour, the failed loaf, her chapped knuckles. His face didn't change. "We eat here to work," he said, voice level, "not to impress. Keep it plain and hot and on time." Nora nodded. "Yes, sir." He angled his head at the stove. "Flue's a mule. It'll knock it clear when he can spare a minute off the south fence." "I'll get it to behave," she said, though the stove seemed bred for spite. He took one breath as if to add something, then didn't. Boots turned, thumped twice. The door closed behind him with a small final sound. She scraped the burnt heel with a knife, saved what she could for crumbs, started again. Beans into a kettle with onion and the smallest cube of salt pork. Cornbread instead of sourdough, quicker, truer to a temperamental fire. She greased the skillet with a thumb of lard, let it haze, poured the batter when the pan spoke up with a dry sizzle. This time the smell lifted right. Sweet meal and fat and a lick of smoke that wasn't unkind. A light scuff at the doorway. A child stood there in a blue dress a size too small. Curls sprung out from a hurried braid. She held a rag doll by one leg. its stitched smile rubbed thin. "Smells like home," the girl said, serious as a judge. Nora wiped her hands. "You must be Emmy." The child nodded, eyes big and brown. "This is Cricket," she added, and gave the doll a little hop as if to prove the name. Footsteps came again, quicker this time. Cole's voice from behind the girl. "Emmy, give Miss Hale room." Emmy didn't leave. She leaned into the jam and breathed deep like a pit at a milk pan. "Is she gonna stay?" "She cooks," Cole said. "That's what she does." Nora kept her face on the skillet, slid the cornbread under the heat, turned it half a hand to catch a hot spot. "Skim the foam off that bean pot, will you?" she asked the child, gentle. "Use the big spoon." Emmy stepped in as if she'd been waiting to be asked all her life. She lifted the spoon careful, blew on the steam, watched the gray bubbles gather and slide away. Cole watched them both, said nothing. After a breath, he pulled the water bucket and set it closer to the pump, as if moving one thing in the room could account for why he hadn't already left. When the cornbread rose and cracked in a good way across the top, Nora grinned without showing teeth. She turned it out onto a towel, let the steam puff. "That there," Emmy said, solemn, "smells like the school social, when they put pies on the table and make you wait." "You from the school yet?" Nora asked. "Not till next year," Emmy said. "I can make my letters, though." She traced an E in the flour dust, 4 lines, one backward. Cricket watched from the edge of the table, fearless of crumbs. The noon bell on the porch pipe clanged, thin and sharp. Men's boots thudded across the yard. Nora cut the cornbread and set the beans to the front, slid coffee to a warmer plate, and wiped the table with the flat of her palm. She found a torn curtain and took needle and thread from her valise, caught the rip with 3 fast stitches at the corner where the wind howled worst. The cloth lifted and fell, no longer flapping like a loose tongue. She set tin plates in a line. Emmy hopped back to the doorway as if she belonged to both rooms at once. Cole passed by, took in the fixed curtain, the stove drawing steadier, the brown square of cornbread breathing out its warm. He slowed a fraction enough to be noticed if a person was counting fractions. Lunch went plain and hot and on time. Beans, a square of bread, coffee, dark as fence tar. The men ate like the honest hungry, spoons scraping, talk low about crusted pastures, and a wolf yodeling last night near the east fence. Whit Rawlins tipped his mug to Nora with a grave little nod that meant edible and then some. When the room emptied, she set the kettle back and scrubbed the skillet till the black turned to a clean sheen. Wind pressed at the east window. She rubbed mutton tallow into her split knuckles till the sting eased. The house sounded different now, still spare, but with a few soft edges put back where they'd been missing. She stood in the doorway and looked at what she'd done, which wasn't much to a stranger's eye. A mended curtain, a stove tamed for an hour, crumbs on a table that wasn't cold anymore. Small work, the kind that keeps a fire. Outside, the day stayed iron gray. Inside, a breath of corn and coffee lingered like a promise that didn't brag. Nora set the starter to one side, fed it a spoon of flour and warm water, and told it, under her breath, "We'll try again when you and that stove come to terms." Before the stars were done burning, Nora had the stove humming low and honest. She greased her cracked hands with mutton tallow, worked it in till the sting quit arguing, then tied on her apron and set coffee to rise out of the dark. "Biscuits today, not sourdough. Trust needs time, even with flour." She cut lard in a meal till it looked like dry snow, poured in buttermilk she'd soured herself, turned the dough with a light hand, no more than needed. The house held the kind of quiet that belongs to people who get up early for a living. Boots thumped from the bunkhouse, a hinge coughed in the hall, wind scraped a dry branch along the eave, long, slow, like a fiddle warming up. Whit Rawlins came first, hat already dusted white. He leaned his fists on the table and drew in the biscuit smell with a satisfied grunt. "Cook like this, even cows'll take the brand." The corner of his mouth bent a fraction. That was his idea of a compliment, and maybe of a joke, both. Nora slid the first pan to the hotter plate, turned her wrist to catch the stove's sweet spot. Beans from yesterday thickened back to life with a dipper of coffee, a trick she'd learned when meat was thin and mornings long. Cole came in behind the men, set a coil of rope on the bench without noise, and took his place against the jam. His face didn't tell, but his shoulders spoke of a night with more thinking than sleep. Talk went low around the table, hay running thin, ice crust on the east pasture, sharp as glass. A wolf's long note near midnight, close enough to pull at a man's back hair. Whit said the south fence held. Pike said the north gate sagged, and wanted a new hinge if they weren't keen to lose calves come March. Cole's jaw worked once. "We'll cut from the west stack and ration tighter. Salt the hay for the weak ones. I'll ride the fence after breakfast." Nora listened and counted in her head. Flour left, beans left, coffee near the bottom. She cut the biscuits clean and quick, split one to check crumb, breathed out. When steam rose right, she poured gravy from a skillet where she'd browned salt pork thin as paper and whisked in milk till it took on a shine. Hands reached, spoons scraped, tin clinked. Men ate in that pure way winter teaches. No waste in words or motions. When the last plate stacked, she scrubbed the skillet with a twist of burlap and a pinch of salt. Rubbed cast iron till it shone like wet coal. She darned a tear in Whit's cuff. While the coffee settled for the second pour, thread bit her finger, a dot of red bloomed, and she sucked it away without fuss. Small work, the kind the world never claps for but misses when it's gone. Day lightened slow, a pewter wash across snow. Cole swung his saddle down from a peg, cinched leather creaking. He glanced once at the neat stack of biscuits wrapped in a towel for his coat pocket. "Appreciate it," he said, not looking at her, which in his language might have been a flourish. Emmy padded in. On bare feet, hair springing free of its braid, cricket dangling from 2 fingers. She breathed the kitchen the way a freezing person breathes a bathhouse. "Story?" she asked, barely above the crackle of the stove, the one where flowers push through ice. Nora wiped her hands and crouched so they were level. "Not a grand story," she said, "just the truth of small things." She held her palm flat. "Ice lays down on a seed like a lid. Seed's got every right to quit, but it swells instead, slow as a prayer, till one morning the lid isn't a lid anymore, it's a window. You get a blade of green, and that blade doesn't argue about winter. It just keeps on." Emmy nodded, grave, as if sworn to the work of green blades herself. "Will you stay till the flowers come?" "If they keep me," Nora said. She looked toward the doorway where Cole was fitting his glove, and the words felt like a pledge left where a man could hear it if he wanted. "I'll stay the season." "Long as there's work for these hands." Cole's glance flicked quick as a bird's. He tipped his hat to Emmy, to Nora by accident or on purpose, hard to tell, and was gone, the door letting in a single hard breath of cold before it shut. By noon the wind had a wire edge. Nora skimmed the last of the coffee grounds and set the starter where the stove heat ran gentle, fed it a spoon of flour like a promise. She stepped to the porch and watched Cole and Whit ride the fence line, 2 dark points moving along a white seam. Far out, a wolf trotted parallel to the herd, gray on gray, keeping his mile. The cattle's breaths rose in fat plumes. A calf bawled once and fell quiet. She went back to her stowed in farsoon, mended the torn corner of a quilt kept on a pantry shelf, folded it smooth. She tucked a heel of biscuit into a pocket for Emmy, because a child's hunger sometimes comes between meals and doesn't wait for a bell. She set a bucket under the pump to catch the thin leak that had been icing the step, and shaved the slick with a coal shovel so the men wouldn't go down on their spurs coming in at dark. Nothing fancy, no brass band, just one thing right after another, like laying kindling stick by stick. Out here, that's what keeps a house from going cold, even when the world means to freeze it to the bone. By sundown, the wind had a razor in it. Snow crystals skittered along the hardpack like ground glass. Cole and Whit came off the fence line stiff with cold and quiet, with the kind of news winter brings. Wolf sign thick at the draw, ice crust eye, holding mean as ever. Nora ladled beans and set biscuits by the stove edge to keep their heat. Emmy ate 2 bites, shoved her spoon down, and went hushed in a way children do when something inside them turns. "Head hurts," she whispered, fingers pressed to her temple. A flush climbed her cheeks that wasn't from the stove. Nora felt her brow, hot as a skillet ring. "When?" "Since the bell," Emmy said, voice thin cricket hung from her hand like a tired bird. Cole was already moving, the sort of quick that hides fear. He brought the water bucket, splashed a rag, wrung it hard, laid it across Emmy's forehead. The child flinched and sucked air through her teeth. "Cold'll beat it down," he said, jaw set like he meant to stare a fever into quitting. "It'll shock her," Nora answered, steady. "Warm, not cold. And we need willow and chamomile." She looked to the window. Night was loading itself into the glass. The road to town might as well have been another country. "Doctor's in Green Rock," Cole said, as if naming a thing could make it nearer. "Bridge is drifted shut." "Then it's us," Nora said. He braced his hands on the table, head down a fraction. When he looked up, his eyes were plain. "Tell me what to do." Nora put the kettle on and fed the stove till the plates blushed dark red. She set a small pot with handfuls of chamomile she kept for her own sleep, and shaved willow bark she'd bargained off a freighter last fall. "Aunt May Caldwell swore by it," she said, more to Emmy than to Cole, because children like to hear that women have done this before, and won. She moved quick without rushing. Warm cloths, wrung till they wouldn't drip, went to Emmy's brow, then changed as soon as they cooled. She slid a basin to the stove rim, threw in cedar sprigs from a bundle Pike had left by the woodbox, made a small tent of a towel over basin and child to lift steam to her face. "Breathe it," Nora said, soft, slow as you can. Emmy tried. The first breath hitched. The second made a small sound like a kitten's startle. "Smells like the barn at Christmas," she said, and managed the barest smile. Cole fetched and carried where Nora pointed. He took her word on temperature, on timing, on how fine to shave the willow so it wouldn't bite the tongue. His hands were strong and all wrong for delicate work. They trembled once when the cloth slipped and struck too cold against the child's skin. He cursed, then stopped himself and swallowed it. Nora blew on the tea, touched it to Emmy's lip a drop at a time, until the girl learned the path her throat would take. She sat on the bed's edge in the little room at the top of the back stairs, the one with a small window fogged to milk, and a view of nothing but their own breath. She rubbed Emmy's back in a slow circle that had no hurry in it. "Good," she said. "That's the way." Downstairs the stove popped and settled, wind hair-pinned along the eaves. Somewhere outside, far and thin, a wolf threw a note that ran its spine along the siding. The house answered with its own old creaks. Nora kept her world to the small square of lamplight, coal oil steady, wick trimmed clean, so the dark in the corners couldn't climb into the bed with the child. Cole stood at the threshold with his hat in his fist, as if he'd forgotten he was holding it. He was a tall shadow with a worried face. A man swung between doing and not breaking. "I can sit a spell," he said, voice hoarse. "Spell you if—" "You can put more water on to warm," Nora said. and split kindling small as finger bones. We'll need steady heat. Not a blaze he went, came back, went again. Each time the room took him in and gave him back like the tide. Emmy drifted and kicked and drifted, heat rolling off her, the kind that makes a pillow feel like it keeps a secret fire. When the fever rose again, Nora set new cloths, lifted steam, rubbed her wrists where the blood rides close. She wet a corner of the rag and stroked along the child's hairline, down behind one ear, a path that carries calm if the hand knows how to lay it. "There you are," she murmured. "There you're." Cole hovered and hated the word. "Shouldn't we fetch?" "You can't fetch the moon either," Nora said, not unkind. "We hold till morning. That's the fight we've got." She didn't say, "and the fight I know." Some things you'll leave unstated so they don't go brittle in the air. The tea did its slow work. The steam eased the catch in Emmy's breath. Nora began to sing then, because there are moments when words need a tune to carry them. Not a fancy hymn, not many notes, just an old cradle song her mother knew, a plain run of sound shaped to a child's ear and a winter house. The lamplight made a small gold boat of the bed. Her voice was the oar. Cole went still at the door jamb like a man who has wandered out of a storm and found he can hear his own heart. It thumped big at first, then found a smaller gate. The lines around his mouth let go a shade. He looked older and younger at once, older with the truth of not being able to lay a hand on this and fix it, younger with the shock of remembering that once upon a time a lullaby made sense. Emmy's lashes left little commas on her cheeks. Sweat beaded at her hairline, bright as dew. Nora felt the shift in heat the way a farrier feels a nail set right. A small easing, a slackening of the tug under her hand. "There," she said, and didn't lift the cloth yet, just let the moment settle and prove itself. She tipped more tea, counted breaths, changed the towel, wrung it with care. "What do I do?" Cole said softly, and the eye in it held all the winters behind him. "You're doing it," Nora said. "Stand there and be her roof." He stayed, which is harder than most men admit. By the small hours, the fever broke fully. Emmy's hair went damp and curly, her mouth soft with sleep. Nora eased the cloth to the wash basin and sat back with her hands open on her knees, palms shiny from steam and work. The house's noises resumed their ordinary lives. The stove ticked, the wind took to scratching instead of howling, the rafters sighed like a tired team turned toward the barn. Nora's own bones found the weight of the night all at once. She meant to stand, meant to put the kettle off and fold the towel and see to the banked fire, but her body wrote a different order. She slid sideways in the chair, head bowed toward the edge of the quilt, one hand still on Emmy's small fingers, and slept the blunt, unpretty sleep of a person who has done what needed doing. Cole stepped in then, quiet as a man can make a boot. He lifted the shearling off his own shoulders and set it around hers, tucking it at the back like he'd watched other hands do once in another house. His thumb brushed the ridge of a tendon at her wrist. Work thin, strong, and he left it there half a second too long for accident. He looked at the child, at the woman, at the lamp that had burned steady through a night that could have gone another way. "Thank you," he said, but so low the room kept it for itself. Down the hall a loose shutter tapped twice, then thought better of it. Outside, the wolf called one last time and trailed off like a rope paying out into dark. Inside, the kettle sighed, the lamp winked, and the small bed gave back a child's easy breathing. Winter thinned by a hair's breadth, and that was enough for the hour. Dawn came pewter, a thin light poured through frost feathers on the pane. The house had that after-battle quiet, the kind with soft clicks and long breaths. Emmy slept on her side, mouth open a little. The fever's shine dried to a rim at her hairline. Nora sat slumped in the chair, chin tipped to her chest, one hand still cupped around the child's fingers, like a fence post set true and left to stand. Cole had not slept. He'd walked the hall and come back, walked the kitchen and come back, each time checking what didn't need checking, lamp oil, banked coals, the latch on the back door, because a man's hands itch for work when there's nothing to fix. His shearling lay over Nora's shoulders, his heat gone from it now, her heat caught. He reached to pull the edge closer under her arm and stopped when his thumb brushed the tendon at her wrist. Work thin, steady. He let the coat fall the way it had been. A thought he didn't welcome stood up in him. If this is what it looks like, if this keeps on, where does that leave the dead? The name formed and sat heavy, Lila Jane, and the house changed weight a second, like a team shifting on ice. He put the thought back where he keeps sharp things and shut the lid. Out the window, morning lay on the yard like dull tin. He pushed into his coat and stepped outside. Cold took the inside of his nose, turned his breath to white rope. The porch boards were sanded with the fine glitter of a clear night. He moved careful where ice took hold, the way men do who know a winter fall can make work twice as hard for months. The barn lot told on the night. Wolf tracks, clean ovals, circled the far pens in lazy loops. Not a rush, a wait. In the near pen, a calf bawled, thin and complaining. The haystack on the west side had dropped a rib. The cut face showed the count of rations like rings in a stump. Whit came out of the bunkhouse shrugging into his coat, hat down low, breath smoking hard. East fence held, Whit said without hello. North gate's got its last day in it. 2 rails split on the back corner. Leary still late on that hinge? Cole asked. Late as Lent, Whit said. He eyed the wolf sign and spit to the side. They're taking measure. We ration tighter, Cole said. Salt the weak pens. Cut from the west stack and leave the ridge hay alone till the next blow. I'll ride the north and swap that gate before noon. Whit looked past him at the house window where a curtain moved with slow human life. Little one? Fever broke, Cole said. The words came out smaller than he meant and landed soft in the cold. Whit nodded like a man stamps a brand. Good. They went to work without talk. That's how men mark thanks when the thing they're thankful for lives in the same house as their fear. Cole salted hay with a slow hand, pinching and shaking, watching old cows nose the white and chew thoughtful. He cut a tighter wedge off the stack and set it on the sled, rope biting his glove. The sky was the color of unshined pewter, the kind that gives a man a headache behind the eyes. He hitched the sled and looked once more at the wolf loops, at the neat way the tracks told a patient story. He didn't like patience in wolves or men. Back inside, heat hit his face and smelled of coffee dregs and last night's cedar. The kettle ticked at the back of the stove like it had a mind to talk. He knocked his boots clear and stood at the bedroom door. Emmy's lashes fluttered, a bird gentle stirring. Nora woke at the change in the room, straightened slow, pain crossing her shoulders like a shadow, and gone. How is she? He asked, voice down to the plank. Good, Nora said, checking with a hand to be certain. Sweat's cooled, right? Breath easy. Emmy blinked, found Nora first, then him. I dreamed about the barn at Christmas, she said, voice rough and proud of it, and about steam. That was real enough, Nora said, a small smile touching just one corner. She wiped the damp at the child's temple with a rag that had lost its edge in the night's work. Cole set a biscuit on the table, wrapped in the towel he'd carried in his pocket since sunup. For when she wants it, he said, as if biscuits could stand between a girl and any more hurt. Nora reached for it, then stopped and drew the shearling tighter at her neck. With one hand, the way a person does when they realize a thing that's been around them all night, belongs to someone else. "Thank you," she said, "not for the coat, not for the biscuit." He didn't ask which. He poured water into the wash basin and set it near, not because she couldn't reach, but because it was a thing he could do that didn't bruise the new quiet. Emmy's fingers worked against Nora's palm once, a little test that found the same warm answer as it had in the dark. "Roads still drifted?" Nora asked, low. "Bridge is a wish," he said. "Town's a rumor." She nodded. "Then we hold the line here." Something eased in him at the way she said "we" without measuring it. He looked at the lamp, the bed, the smallness of what had saved a life in the night, and it seemed larger than the size of the room. The house felt different by a hair, not warmer by degrees, truer. He set his hat back on. "North Gate," he said. "Watch the ice by the draw," she said. "It wears a thin skin after sun." He paused because she spoke like someone who'd walked the same country, even if her path had been different. "I will." After he left, Nora stood and every bone told its piece of the story. She rolled her shoulders and the ache set in, good and honest. She folded the shearling and laid it over the chair back where it could still hold the room's warmth, then washed her hands slow, steam lifting around her wrists, like rest. Emmy opened one eye. "Cricket wants breakfast," she said. "Cricket can wait her turn like any hand," Nora Pray said, and the child grinned into the pillow. Down in the kitchen she found the starter alive by the stove, bubbles poking at the surface like questions. She fed it a spoon of flour and warm water. "We'll try again," she told it. "Stove and I made a sort of peace." She set a small pan of milk to scald and sprinkled coffee grounds through a rag to make a second brew from the first. Thin, but it would do for a morning after a night like that. Outside, a crow scolded at nothing in particular. Inside, the house breathed with them, 3 people and one old grief and something that might yet grow if no one looked it in the eye too hard. On her way back up with the biscuit and the thin coffee, Nora glanced out the east window. Wolf tracks ghosted the edge of the yard, precise as writing. She touched the glass with 2 fingers, then turned from it to the stair. Winter had not changed its mind, but it had been made to wait a while, and sometimes that's all the victory a day can carry. Noon came off true, bright for 10 minutes, then flat as tin. The yard held still in that tricky way before something gives. Snow on the lean-to roof had taken on a skin, glazed hard by last night's breath and this morning's stinging. It looked pretty, the kind of brightness a person might trust if they didn't know winter. Nora folded the shearling over the chair back and carried the empty basin to the kitchen. She was halfway to the pump when the house made a sound she hadn't heard yet, a long, low groan that seemed to come up through the joists and into the bones of her feet. She stopped. Wind went silent in the pause, then a dry crack, not loud, just true. Outside, a slab of ice slid an inch on the lean-to's rafters and held its breath. "Cricket!" Emmy's voice, light, then sliding toward trouble. The doll had tumbled off the porch rail and skidded under the lean-to where the sled and tack hung. Emmy darted for it, fast as only children are when a small thing matters like air. "Emmy, hold!" Nora was already moving. She hit the porch in 3 steps, boots whispering on packed frost, and dropped off the edge to the yard. The air had the taste of a nail in it. She caught Emmy's sleeve just as the girl bent under the lean-to, set her back with a gentleness built out of steel. "Stay with the post." She crouched and reached in herself, fingers closing on the doll's leg, where its muslin was shine-worn. She could smell cold iron, dry leather, mouse dust. The lean-to spoke again, a different note, higher. Nora didn't think. She just threw the doll back to Emmy and turned to put her body between the child and the roof when the beam under the ice load let go. It didn't fall far, 2 hands' worth, but it fell enough. The crosspiece came down in a stiff, straight drop, edge catching Nora on the shoulder and pinning her where she'd tried to fold over the girl. The breath left her in a hard grunt. Pain flashed white and clean, then fixed itself like a spike. She tasted copper. Snow dust lifted and hung in the air, glittering where light came through slats. Emmy made a sound that tore itself out of small lungs and filled the yard. "Papa, I'm here," Nora said, voice thin as thread and somehow steady. "I'm here, Bug." Back to the post. Back and hold to it. She shoved with her free hand and got Emmy into the clean of the doorway, then flattened herself to keep the rest of the weight from swinging onto the child if anything else let go. The beam's rough edge bit through her dress and into the meat of her shoulder. Heat came hot under the cold, the kind that's not a friend. From the corral a horse snorted, then the sound of a man running fast and wrong for the footing. Whit's coat flashed first, then Cole, a dark line headed straight into the bright. "Nora." Cole's voice cracked on the name, then dropped to something that could work. He slid on one knee under the lean-to, took in the angle, the splinter, the way the rafter had twisted. "Whit." "Rope and the cant hook." "We'll lever the basher." Whit had the rope off his shoulder before the word finished. He looped it around the far upright, set the cant hook under the beam, spit in his palm like a ritual, and braced. Snow squeaked under his boots. Cole slid his shoulder under the beam as far as he dared, without taking the whole mess down, jaw set so the muscles in his cheek stood like cord. "Emmy," Nora said, calm she built out of breath. "Count for me. 1 to 10, slow as turtle. I'm listening." "1," the child whispered, hiccuping. 2. "On 3, Cole told Whit. "Take the slack and lift." He looked once at Nora, and she saw a man stripped to truth. 3, Emmy said, small as a pine cone. Whit heaved on the cant hook. The beam rose a hair. The rope went tight and sang a little. Cole pushed up with his back, legs crouched, the whole of him a lever. The beam moved just enough to take the killing weight, not enough to be sure. 4, Emmy said, a little stronger. Nora slid her pinned shoulder a finger's width toward daylight, and the world exploded to bright. She bit it back, teeth meeting, sound held to a hiss, because the child was counting, and the numbers were their bridge. "Hold it," Whit growled. "I've got it," Cole said through his teeth, and he did. Veins stood at his neck, breath smoked in hard bursts. "Nora, now!" She pulled her arm free like a trapped thing, flesh screaming, and found snow with both palms. She rolled, pulled her body out, and the beam dropped the inch it had been robbed, hitting the earth with a fool's thud. Light swam and came back. Emmy launched, and Cole caught her with one hand and Nora with the other, a clumsy human knot that somehow held. Emmy was crying into Cole's coat, words lost in cloth. Nora kept one forearm tight around the child's back, her other hand on cold ground, steadying the world. Cole dragged them clear of the lean-to and sat back hard, pulling air like a man up from a deep hole. He looked at Nora then, not the capable hands, and not the apron, and not the woman who had made a house run in quiet ways, just at her. There was fear in him, honest and unhidden, and something riding behind it that had been waiting its turn. "I can't lose my girl," he said hoarse, as if the words scraped his throat on the way out. He turned the same look on Nora and didn't flinch. "Can't lose you either." Snow ticked in the silence that followed. Whit stood off a piece, rope slack at his boot, head turned polite to give a moment its room. The wind came back to itself and pulled a small cold through the yard, the kind that wakes a man up. Nora swallowed, tasted iron and cedar and the strange sweetness that sometimes comes after pain. Emmy's heart thumped wild against her ribs. "We're here," she said. It wasn't poetry, it was inventory, the kind you make after a near thing and take comfort from. Whit cleared his throat, business grabbing the reins again. "We'll shore that lean-to before sundown." Ice'll take the rest if we let it think it can." He looked at Nora's shoulder. "You'll blacken there, miss." "It'll keep," Nora said. Cole stood, and the world changed a fraction under his boots. He shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around both of them, drawing the wool close across Nora's bad shoulder and Emmy's narrow back, bundling them together in a clumsy, careful way that had no practice in it and all the right intent. He held on a second longer than the cold required. "Inside," he said, gentler than she'd heard him yet. To wit, "Block the sled under that rafter. I'll fetch the jack when I've got them set." They moved as a unit, the man, the woman, the child, across the bright yard and into the dark mouth of the house. Behind them the beam lay in the snow like a felled thing that had missed its mark. The lean-to dripped once, twice, and fell quiet, having said its piece. In the kitchen Nora sat and let the room stop tipping. Pain sorted itself into edges she could name. Emmy's breath lost its hitch and found a pattern. Cole knelt to eye the shoulder and didn't touch it, because men learn what to help and what to leave. His hands shook a little anyway. Outside, Wit's axe rang, the sound that says a place intends to stand. Inside, the stove took a deeper breath and gave it back warm. Winter had made a play and been answered, not with heroics the town would gossip over, but with rope, leverage, muscle, and a sentence said plain enough to hang in the air and change the weather of a house. Afternoon slid down the panes like smoke. Wit's axe kept a slow, stubborn beat outside, then the clack of a jack and the grunt of wood agreeing to stand again. Inside, the house moved in smaller sounds, the lick of flame, the tick of cooling iron, a child breathing through her nose the soft way of the well-tired. Emmy slept on the settee with Cricket under her chin, both of them salted with a few bright crumbs of snow that had ridden in on coats and boots and the rough of a scare. Nora's shoulder had stiffened to a clean ache that let her sort what she could lift and what she ought to leave. She peeled her dress back from the sore place and bound it with a strip torn from a worn pillowcase. Knots small and quick. Then she set herself to quiet work, folded the towels they'd used, rinsed the basin, wiped the cedar sheen off the table with a rag that smelled of lye and winter sun. She went looking for a fresh cloth and found the narrow drawer by the back bedroom half stuck. She worried it loose with the heel of her hand and slid it wide. Under a neat stack of shirts lay a square of fabric folded careful as Sunday, linen thin with years, edged in blue flowers stitched so regular they looked printed. In the corner, letters no bigger than a thumb. L.J. Soap lived in it still, a sweet ghost. Nora ran a fingertip along the embroidery, felt where a needle had split thread and been pulled back and set right. Work recognizes work. She should have shut the drawer and left it to its shelf of time. Instead, she lifted the square and held it to the light so the weave showed like snow under moon. "You found it?" Cole's voice carried from the doorway, roughened by cold and by a day that had asked extra of his back. Hat off, hair flattened, he stood with the look of a man who surprised himself by speaking first. His eyes went to the cloth, then to her bound shoulder, then away, as if the path of his gaze could keep him from tripping what lay between. "I was hunting towels," Nora said, low. "It was in the way of the hunt." He stepped into the hall light. "I should have put it away proper," he said, "or given it to her people." His thumb rubbed at a spot on his palm only he could feel. "I kept thinking if I moved it, I'd move. More than cloth. Things carry weight," Nora said, "even folded." He nodded once. "Lila Jane hemmed that on a Sunday after church, said blue flowers made winter feel less like a dare." He huffed something that wanted to be a laugh and couldn't quite. "She stitched tight." Never trusted a knot to hold on its own. Nora refolded the square on its old lines, laid her hand flat to press it smooth without claiming it. "It's fine work," she said. fine keeping. He watched her hands the way a man watches a team he's thinking to buy. Measure first, then the trust, if it comes. The house felt smaller and truer all at once. In the parlor, a log collapsed in the grate. The stove answered with a soft, satisfied breath. "I don't know how a man is meant to stand in two places," he said finally, words plain because fancy ones wouldn't do the job. "I don't know how to open my door to a warm thing and not feel like I'm shutting another." Nora leaned her bad shoulder against the jamb so the ache would keep her honest. "Where I come from," she said, "winter teaches you what matters. You don't throw out coals because a new stick catches. You bank what's left and lay to it. You keep fire. You don't forget snow." She lifted her eyes and let him have the whole of what she meant. It isn't betrayal to be warm. A strip of the day hung between them, thin as ice and just as clear. In it, a man could see himself if he wanted. Coals he worked once, then eased. He took a step and stopped, close enough she could see the nick on his chin from a razor pulled in a hurry. His hand came up, not to touch, just to be near, in case the bridge would hold his weight. Footsteps in the yard saved them from saying more than the moment could carry. Whit filled the back door with his square shoulders and the smell of cut pine. He knocked his boots and came in respectful as church. His eyes took in the bandage, the square of linen in Nora's hand, the set of Cole's mouth, and he tipped his head like a man nods to weather he's been waiting on. "Lean-to's cribbed and jacked," he said. "I wedged the bad post and chained the crosspiece till we can set a new one tomorrow. Ice thinks it's winning. It ain't." He saw the cloth again and let a grin tug at the corner of his beard. "That the old blue? Lord, I haven't seen that fool thing since the 4th you spilled lemonade down it and near cried." Cole snorted despite himself. "She about boxed my ears." "Deserved," Whit said. He hooked a thumb toward the cracked kitchen window. "Smells here's different. Not just cedar. Cook's got a way of opening a window in a house without the sash moving." "That's so," Cole said, not looking away from Nora. Whit cleared his throat, tone gone easy. "I'll check the north gate again before dark. If I don't come back, I went to argue with Leary about that hinge till he finds his hurry." He dragged his hat down and slipped out, leaving the door ajar. Ajar just long enough for a stripe of cold to lay itself across the floor and vanish. They stood again in the narrow hall where winter had no say. Nora slid the apron back into its drawer, set it square, and pushed the wood home till it kissed the frame. When she straightened, Cole's hand was close enough that her fingers grazed the back of his, callus against callus, a spark like the smallest man-pitch crack in a quiet fire. Both of them felt it. Neither made a sermon of it. "I'll put coffee on," she said, though the pot was already warm. "I'll stack another armload," he said, though the woodbox was near full. Small lies that mean, "I'll be near if you need me." He went past her, slow, careful of the shoulder she favored, careful of the space that had changed shape between breaths. She listened to him cross the parlor, the back door, the porch, each board answering with its known voice. She laid her palm flat on the closed drawer, just once, the way a person thanks a thing that held more than cloth. In the kitchen she set 2 cups under the lamplight and eased down into a chair with the deliberate grace of someone making room for pain. The stove sang its soft metal song. Outside, Whit's voice lifted and dropped, giving the yard his usual sermon about how a ranch stands by hands, by rope, by the 1,000 quiet choices that keep a place from coming apart. Inside, the house kept company with itself. A sleeping child, a man hauling wood, a woman who had learned how to bank a fire without losing any of the coals that made it worth having in the first place. road to town cut a pale scar through the drifts. Cole set the sled runners on it at mid-morning when the sky held steady and Emmy was asleep under a quilt that smelled of cedar and soap. Whit planted himself as housewatch, Cricket propped in his shirt pocket like a deputy with nothing better to do. "Bring back Hinge and Flower," he said. "Bring back news if it ain't the worrying kind." The team took the grade slow, breath pluming. Pines wore rime like old lace. Nora tucked her hands in her muff and let the cold smart her awake. She had wrapped her shoulder tight and said nothing about it. Cole drove with that quiet he favored when something might need saying later. Green Rock in winter was a scatter of fronts shouldered together against the wind. Mercantile, smithy, livery, the hall with a bell out front for meetings and fires. Smoke hung low. Folks moved quick between doors, shoulders hunched, words kept short, so they wouldn't freeze on the way out. Eudora Abernathy was first to see them, chin tucked in a wool that had outlived 3 fashions. She looked at Cole, then at Nora, then at the sled side where sack space waits for money and intention. Her mouth found a line. "Turner," she said, "brought the cook to keep your spices honest?" "Brought the person who knows what we need," Cole said, and stepped down to set the brake. He didn't bother to lower his voice. "He's thin. I aim to buy flour, coffee, and what willow bark Mrs. Grieving can spare. Inside the mercantile, mister." Leary stood behind a crate of hinges like a preacher behind a pulpit, jaw working on a peppermint. "Mornin', Turner. Heard your North Gate sings for want of hardware." "It sings off key because you're late," Whit would have said. Cole only pointed at the right size. Leary's eyes slid to Nora. "You runnin' tabs now for more than your bunkhouse?" Nora answered before Cole could stiffen. "No tabs. Cash and work. I'll need 10 sacks flour if you're not holding them for your cousins, 2 of coffee, and willow if Mrs. Grieving will part with it. Chamomile too. Molds bed in the back rooms." Leary's eyebrows lifted at the count. Cole set his palms on the plank counter. "Hands eat. Herd eats. Winter takes its cut. We'll not dicker about the parts we can help." Mrs. Grieving shuffled out from behind a curtain, cardigan buttoned wrong, kindness set permanent in the corners of her eyes. "I'll spare the willow, dear. Your little one feverish last night?" "She's turned," Nora said, "but the road was closed. Your teas did the work from here." "Good hands did the work," the old woman said, and put 2 paper-wrapped bundles on the counter with a mother's finality. "On me." "It's not," Nora began. "It's settled," Mrs. Grieving said. "You send me a pan of those biscuits I've been smelling a week now, and we'll call it trade." They stepped back into light thinned by cloud. Outside the hall, men gathered with hay on their talk. Shares, sled routes, which stacks were safe to cut, and which would mean trouble come March. Cole tied down the flour and walked Nora toward the knot of coats and brimmed hats. Eudora and Leary were there, and 2 ranchers whose names wore dust. A few glances slid off Nora like sleet off a good roof. One caught and stuck. "Turner's, ish," a man said, not unkind, just testing. "You hiring charity or help?" Cole didn't hitch or warm up for it. He set his stance and let the words come plain. "This here's Miss Nora Hale. She cooks at Bar Ting. She kept my girl through a fever when the bridge might as well have been the ocean. She feeds my hands and keeps 'em standing. I trust her to lay out the food that keeps men and herd on their feet. That answer the part you asked and the part you didn't?" It was the longest thing he'd said in town since the funeral. The bell rope at the hall stirred once, as if the building wanted to nod. Men shifted, not away, just into a new shape. A few hats tipped, one mouth shut on what it had been getting ready to say. Eudora held, because some folks are flint even when you show them the match. "Words are warm," she said. "Bread's warmer." "Then you'll have both," Nora answered. No starch in it, no fight. Just the calm of a woman who had scrubbed a floor till it showed boards again, and knew exactly what effort was worth. She looked past Eudora to the small boy on the bench by the livery door, chapped nose shining, eyes watering. "Your Jimmy's got a cough that rattles. Onion syrup will help. I'll send a jar and a heel of bread by Pike on his way back from the smithy." Eudora blinked once, slow. "You mind your own kitchen," she said, softer than she started. "But—" She didn't finish the but. She looked at Jimmy, then at Nora's wrapped shoulder, then down at her hands as if they'd been caught doing something useful. They loaded the last of it. Leary brought the hinge like a man remembering he sells more than talk. "You pay today, I'll bring the rest of the set by week's end," he said, eyes not quite meeting Cole's. "Weather willing." "Make weather willing," Cole said, but he took the hinge because a ranch that won't take what's on offer dies of pride. On the ride home, the wind stayed honest, and the team pulled easy with the grain sacks trimmed low in the sled. Cole drove with one glove off, bare hand on the brake when the grade steepened. Twice he looked over and said nothing. Twice Nora let the quiet do its good work. Back at Bar T, Emmy ran to the porch wrapped in a quilt, Wit behind her with the hinge lifted like a prize. "Town still there?" he asked. "Mostly," Cole said. He swung the flour in and set the coffee tin on the shelf bowl where a house keeps its hope. Nora went to work with the rhythm that makes a kitchen's heart beat. Onion syrup for Jimmy, sliced and sugared in a crock, set near heat till it gave up its medicine. A small loaf formed quick from the starter that had finally learned the stove's moods, baked in a pan, greased with lard until the top went brown, and a tap on it sounded like a full belly knocking. Once to say thanks. She wrapped both in a towel, wrote EUDORA across a scrap of paper, and set the bundle by the door for Pike. Supper went quiet and right. Beans leaned on ham bone, cornbread split with steam, coffee strong enough to argue kindly. Emmy's cheeks held a healthy pink, and she laughed at Wit's story about a cow that learned to open a gate with her tongue. Cole ate slow and stayed at the table 2 minutes after his plate was clean, which in that house passed for lingering. Later, when the lamps were turned down to a soft ring, Pike stamped in with snow on his cuffs. "Drop the bundle," he reported. Eudora said nothing. Jimmy took to the syrup like a pup to warm milk. Nora nodded and set one more stick on the banked fire. Outside, the wolves kept their mile. Inside, the room held a new weight, the kind made of flour sacks stacked safe, a hinge laid on a bench ready for morning, and a sentence spoken in town that settled into the timbers like heat. Spring came sideways, ice still mean in the shade, mud taking a man by the heel where the sun had its say. Green Rock strung lanterns along the hall porch. Fiddles tuned inside, a saw rasp that promised cheer if you gave it a minute. Nora set 2 pumpkin pies on the long table where every woman laid down what she called good. Spice rose warm as a hand to the face. Folks drifted that way without meaning to. Emmy wore a ribbon Wit claimed he found in a feed sack. Cricket rode her arm like a lady. Cole stood a step back from the door, hat in his hand, shoulders squared like a man about to do a job he hadn't done in years. "You sure?" he asked Nora, quiet enough to get lost under the tuning. "No one's sure of spring," she said. "That's never stopped it." The band struck up. Boots scuffed the powdered floor, men called figures, women laughed into their palms the way they do when the laugh's for themselves. Eudora hovered near the pies like a weather vane, eyes sharp and busy. Leary leaned on a post, Peppermint working his jaw. A rancher with a red neckerchief and good teeth grinned at Cole. "Who's minding your stove, Turner?" "Seems you brought the whole kitchens here," Cole said. "Because I am." He set the words down plain and let them sit. Nora felt the room tip a hair like a sled finding a smoother line. She wiped her palms on her skirt, not to banish nerves, just to keep them company. Cole looked at her then, not past or around. The music slid from brisk to something with a long line in it. "I'm clumsy," he said, "but I aim to learn again." He held his hand out, the ask as simple as a cup of water. She put her fingers in his. His palm was warm and rough and careful. They stepped into the circle. First pass, he landed heavy. Second, he found the beat hiding under his boots. Nora carried the turn when he needed, then set it back in his hand without making a lesson of it. Lantern light swam over them like creek gold. Somebody whooped at the far end, and somebody else hushed him, as if the room knew to keep its better manners for once. Cole bent his head. "I keep thinking the dead will hear," he said, breath on her hair, "and then I think maybe they already have, and it's us who are late to it." "Keep the fire," she said. "Don't forget the snow." The words had made sense once in a kitchen. They made more here. The tune settled. Fiddles hung a last sweet note in the rafters. Cole let her hand go and reached into his vest for a small thing that had rubbed smooth against his breath for a long time. Silver, plain, a circle worked down by years of coat and work and the hold of a thumb. He didn't kneel. He wasn't that kind of man, and this wasn't that kind of floor. He just lifted the ring where the room could see it and spoke like he'd speak to weather or work. "Not my cook," he said. "My home." Quiet came up from the boards, rolled through the hall, and put palm on every mouth. Eudora's eyes went bright in a way she'd pretend was lantern glare. Leary took the peppermint out of his cheek and forgot to put it back. Whit stood to the side with his hat at his knee and a grin he didn't apologize for. Emmy piped from the bench by the pies, high as a meadowlark. "Can Miss Nora be family?" That did it. The silence broke like river ice. Hands clapped, boots stomped, someone hit a wrong chord and no one cared. Cole slid the ring onto Nora's finger, and if his hand shook, it was only a little. She looked at the circle where it lay, not fancy, not big, and felt how it weighed exactly what it ought. Eudora edged closer and took a small, deliberate bite of pie. "Bread's warm," she said, like conceding a case. "So's a word kept." She nodded, once, then twice, as if bowing to a partner she hadn't meant to dance with. Cole's breath let out slow. He didn't smile much, as a rule. He did now, the kind that changes a face rather than just a mouth. Nora answered with less of a smile and more of a steadiness that shows up in a person's eyes when their road finds a gate that opens. The band ran the tune again, faster this time. Cole swung Nora through the line. Emmy grabbed Whit's fingers and made him hop like a man wearing new spurs. Lantern swam. The bell on the porch knocked once in a gust and found its rest. And outside, the thaw dripped its patient measure off the eaves. Somebody near the door said, "Well, I'll be," and somebody else said, "About time." The night went on with the decent racket of a town, remembering how to be kind in public, and in the middle of it, a plain silver ring caught lamplight and held it, the way a stove grate hold heat after the last stick drops, and the house, for once, does not go cold. The old bunkhouse came clean with work, windows scraped to real glass, floorboards scoured till the knots showed like eyes. Cole planed rough edges off 2 long planks and set them on sawhorses for benches. Whit squared the blackboard to the wall with a carpenter's stubbornness, and a string line pulled tight. Chalk dust rose and made sunlight look like it had weight. By first snowmelt, the room held a winter school. Children came in boots too big and coats too thin, noses shining, hair licked smooth with water. Emmy laid slates in a careful row. Cricket parked on the shelf like a foreman. Nora drew letters slow and plain, A like a pine, M like mountain, O like a ring that meant what it said. "Say it, then write it," she told them. "Mouth teaches hand." Cole read on Wednesdays, voice deep over the scrape of chalk, almanac facts, a psalm, a seed catalog line about hardy beans. He mended a stub pencil with his pocket knife, set a loose nail, quieted a boy who only knew how to learn by fidgeting. Outside, calves bawled. The wolves had widened out to their own hills, and the fence no longer sang at night. Eudora came twice with a jar of apple butter and a boy who breathed easy now. Onion syrup did its Christian duty, she said, setting the jar down like an offering. She watched Emmy carry a primer to a smaller girl, watched Nora bend, slow and careful, to show where a letter begins its climb. Bread's warm, she added, but word is, too. Leary brought the rest of the hinges without being chased. He stood in the doorway and took off his hat to no one in particular. Gate don't sing anymore, he reported. Figured you'd want news of it. Cole nodded once, which in that room passed for a handshake. Smell of bread drifted from the house when Nora set loaves to cool on tea towels. Children spelled with their lips when they thought no one looked. Whit pretended not to be moved and whittled a peg to fit the map roller while keeping one ear on the sums. In a spare minute, Nora tacked 2 squares of cloth above the board. The blue flower apron marked LJ, and beside it a new white square stitched in brown thread with 3 names. Cole, Nora, Emmy. A small cedar sprig pinned both, green holding beside blue like 2 winters that knew each other's weather. Evenings the house exhaled into itself. Cole's pipe stayed unlit more often than not. He liked the smell of cedar better these days. Emmy sprawled in front of the stove with cricket and a book that smelled of glue and thumbed pages. Nora mended what life phrase and let the day settle like snow after wind, each flake finding its piece of ground. One soft night, lanterns turned the porch to honey. The ridge wore the last white in seams only a knowing eye could find. Cole leaned on the post and listened to the schoolroom tick as it cooled, the wood and the nails and the long bench all naming what they were made of. "Never thought the bunkhouse would carry words," he said. "Boards are good at carrying," Nora answered. "So are people, if you let 'em." He looked at the 2 cloths through the window. The blue flowers, the brown names, and the air around his breath eased. "I keep both on purpose," he said, in case a person needed hearing it plain. "I know," she said. "So does the house." When Cricket started up under the porch, Emmy came to the door in a nightdress that had seen 2 summers and a winter of quilts. She had that sheepish, brave look of a child who knows she's out past her hour. "I'm bigger now," she said, small and hopeful, "but you still, you know." Nora wiped her hands and held her arms open. "Long as I've got breath." They climbed the stairs slow, the way you do when you're not in a hurry to leave the sound of a man on the porch or the tick of a stove settling in. In the small room with the window that once showed only their breath, Nora tucked the quilt under Emmy's feet, smoothed the crease where it always tried to fold back, set Cricket at guard. She pressed a kiss to a warm forehead that didn't burn anymore and turned the lamp down till it made a coin of light on the wall. Cole waited in the hall with his palm on the doorframe, thumb running over the gouge some old boot heel had left years back. He looked at Nora and saw the work of the day and the promise of tomorrow and maybe 2 winters' worth of mercy stitched in one woman's steady hands. "Thank you," he said, "not for the first time, not for the last." Downstairs, the schoolroom held its own small weather. Chalk on the board, 2 cloth squares, cedar scent, a pile of slates washed and leaned to dry. Outside, thaw dripped patient from the eaves. Inside, the sounds that make a house spoke up and took their places. A stove's last breath, a pencil rolling and stopping, the soft murmur of a woman and a man marking the turn of a day without needing to say much about it. The west stayed wide and bare and honest beyond their fence. Winter would come again, that was the bargain. But the fire they kept didn't brag and didn't beg. It just held, banked right, tended daily, never at the cost of forgetting the snow that taught them how. And in that holding, the ranch stood, and the family inside it did, too. When the lamps go low and the stove ticks, that's where this tale leaves us. Warm, steady, and honest as hand-stitched cloth. If it's settled right in your chest, tell me so. Comment 0 if you felt the heat, 1 if you're riding on to the next story. Hit subscribe and saddle up. More Old West hearts and hard winters are waiting down the trail.